She stood in the freezing rain, locked out of her own home by a husband who had already moved his mistress in. With $0 to her name, she pulled out a dusty card her late, supposedly penniless father had left her. When the banker swiped it, he screamed. The deadbolt of the heavy oak door echoed like a gunshot through the freezing November air. Fiona Preston stood on the wet brick sidewalk of Beacon Hill, Boston, shivering in a thin trench coat. The rain was torrential, slicing sideways and soaking right through to her bones. But the physical cold was nothing compared to the ice forming in her chest. "Don't make this ugly, Fiona." Richard's voice had sounded so calm just 5 minutes earlier. Her husband of 10 years, a man whose real estate empire she had helped build from a cramped apartment in Somerville, had stared at her with eyes devoid of any human empathy. "My attorneys have already filed the paperwork in Delaware. The house is under the LLC. The joint accounts are frozen pending mediation. You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out." Before she could even process the betrayal, a blonde woman in her early 20s had stepped into the foyer. It was Jessica, Richard's junior acquisitions director. She was wearing Fiona's custom silk La Perla robe, holding a mug of chamomile tea, looking at Fiona with a mixture of pity and triumph. Then the door slammed shut. Fiona stumbled to her 2014 Honda Civic, the only asset in her name because Richard always insisted they keep things modest on paper for tax purposes. Her hands shook violently as she unlocked her phone, water droplets smudging the screen. She opened her Bank of America app. Available balance, 0. He had drained everything. Even the emergency savings account she had built from her freelance graphic design work was completely gone, legally siphoned away through a loophole her husband's ruthless legal team had constructed. She tried her American Express card on her Apple Wallet to book a cheap motel room in Waltham. Declined. Fiona curled her knees to her chest in the driver's seat, the windows of the Civic fogging up as her shallow, panicked breaths filled the small space. She had no family left, no siblings, no mother. Only her father, Thomas Gable, who had passed away 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer. Thomas was a quiet, fiercely private man who spent his life smelling of motor oil and Folgers coffee. He ran a small, failing auto repair shop on the outskirts of Worcester. He lived in a double-wide trailer and wore the same 3 pairs of stained Carhartt overalls. When he died, the bank took the shop, and the trailer was sold to cover his medical debts. Fiona had paid for his cremation with a credit card. He had died exactly as he lived, penniless and invisible. But as Fiona sat in her freezing car in a Walmart parking lot just off Route 1, crying until her ribs ached, a memory pierced through her panic. For a rainy day, Fiona, her father had rasped from his hospice bed, pressing a small, scuffed leather pouch into her hands. "Only when the storm is at its worst. And promise me, don't ever let anyone see it until you absolutely have to." Fiona popped the glove compartment. She had tossed the pouch in there years ago, dismissing it as the sentimental ramblings of a dying man who had nothing left to give. Her trembling fingers pushed aside old insurance registrations and a half-empty pack of napkins until they brushed against worn leather. She pulled the pouch into the dim yellow light of the car's dome lamp. Inside was no cash, no sentimental locket. It was a card. It was heavier than any credit card she had ever held, made of a matte black brushed metal that felt ice-cold to the touch. There was no logo, no Visa, no MasterCard, no bank name. There was only a 12-digit string of numbers, heavily embossed, and a large, intricately designed 24-karat gold microchip. Stuck to the back was a yellowed piece of masking tape with 4 numbers written in her father's messy scrawl, 4912. Fiona stared at it. It looked like a prop from a spy movie, completely out of place in the hands of a Worcester mechanic's daughter. Could it be a prepaid debit card he had loaded with a few $100s? Maybe a secret account with just enough to buy her a hot meal and a tank of gas? As the sun began to rise over the dreary Boston skyline, casting a grey, unforgiving light on the worst morning of her life, Fiona made a decision. She wiped her ruined makeup from her face, put the car in drive, and headed toward the financial district. The J. Morgan Chase branch on Post Office Square was a temple of wealth. Towering marble columns, vaulted ceilings, and security guards in tailored suits projected an aura of absolute financial authority. Fiona felt the stares the moment she walked through the revolving glass doors. She looked like a vagrant. Her trench coat was damp and wrinkled, her hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes were red and swollen. The wealthy patrons, men in Brioni suits and women carrying Hermes Birkin bags, subtly stepped away from her as she approached the teller line. She walked up to a young teller whose name tag read Chloe. Chloe had perfectly arched eyebrows, pristine acrylic nails, and a look of barely concealed disdain as she took in Fiona's appearance. "Can I help you?" Chloe asked, her tone dripping with the kind of corporate politeness that is actually meant to insult. I need to check the balance on this card, please." "And maybe make a withdrawal," Fiona said, her voice raspy from a night of crying in the cold. She slowly slid the heavy black metal card across the polished granite counter. The cashier, Chloe, frowned and picked it up, immediately surprised by its unusual weight. She turned it over several times, searching for a magnetic strip, recognizable logo, customer service number, or anything that might identify the card. Finding nothing, her skepticism deepened. "Ma'am, this isn't a standard issue card," Chloe said. "Is this some kind of novelty item? Because if you're trying to—" "Please," Fiona interrupted softly. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. "Just run the chip. The pin is 4912. Please. I only need to know if there's enough for one hotel room." Chloe sighed dramatically and rolled her eyes. "Fine. But if this jams my machine, I'm calling security." Fiona lowered her gaze, saying nothing. She simply waited, her hands trembling against the counter as Chloe inserted the strange card into the terminal. Chloe inserted the thick gold chip into the specialized terminal. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the entire computerized teller system froze. Chloe clicked her mouse aggressively. "Great, it froze my terminal. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to." Suddenly, the standard blue J. Morgan interface on Chloe's monitor vanished. The screen snapped to a pitch-black background. A single blinking red box appeared in the center of the monitor. The text inside it was entirely in Russian, followed by a string of military-grade encryption codes, before finally translating to English. "Restricted access. Tier 0 asset identified. Require branch manager biometric override." Chloe's annoyance vanished, replaced by genuine confusion. She had worked at this high-wealth branch for 3 years and had never seen a prompt like this. Hold on. I need to get Mr. Kensington. David Kensington, the branch manager, was a man who prided himself on control. Impeccably groomed, wearing a $4,000 Tom Ford suit, he despised disruptions on his floor. When Chloe frantically waved him over, he briskly walked behind the counter, clearly irritated. "What is the issue, Chloe?" "We have high-net-worth clients waiting," David snapped quietly. "It's this card, sir," Chloe whispered, pointing at the black screen. "A walk-in handed it to me. The system completely locked me out and is asking for your thumbprint." David adjusted his cuffs, annoyed. He glanced briefly at Fiona, registering her disheveled, impoverished appearance, before looking at the screen. He placed his thumb on the biometric pad attached to the keyboard. The system whirred. The black screen dissolved, revealing a dashboard that looked nothing like a bank account. It looked like a global satellite terminal. David's eyes scanned the information. Account holder Gabel Thomas. Status deceased. Beneficiary transferred Preston Fiona. Classification Sovereign Shadow Fund Alpha Protocol. Then David saw the balance. It wasn't a few $100. It wasn't even a few million. The number staring back at him was 12,450,000. But it wasn't just the $12.5 billion that made the blood instantly drain from David Kensington's face. It was the red flashing alert at the bottom of the screen. Warning: this asset is protected by the United States Department of Defense and the Swiss Global Intelligence Directive. Any unauthorized delay in client request is classified as an act of treason. Secure the client immediately. David stopped breathing. He stumbled backward, his heel catching on a rolling chair. He hit the granite counter behind him, knocking over a heavy stack of deposit slips and a ceramic pen holder, which shattered loudly on the tile floor. The entire bank went dead silent. David Kensington, a man who regularly had lunch with senators and billionaires, let out a visceral, terrified scream. "Lock the doors," David shrieked, his voice cracking hysterically. He pointed a shaking finger at the armed security guards. "Pull the steel grates. Shut down the perimeter. Now." The guards, startled by the sheer panic in their manager's voice, immediately slammed their hands onto the emergency lockdown buttons. Heavy steel shutters began crashing down over the massive glass windows. The main doors bolted shut with a heavy mechanical clack. Fiona panicked. "Oh my God," she thought. "The card is stolen. My dad was a thief. They're locking me in to arrest me." She grabbed her purse and took a step backward, terrified. I didn't know," she cried out. "I'll leave. You can keep the card. Just let me go." David didn't just walk out from behind the counter. He scrambled. He practically threw himself over the low swinging door of the teller station, ignoring his torn suit trousers. He sprinted toward Fiona, sliding on the marble floor, and fell to his knees directly in front of her. "Mrs. Preston," David gasped, looking up at her with eyes wide with sheer terror. He was actually trembling. "Mrs. Preston, I beg your forgiveness. We didn't know. We weren't prepared for a Tier 0 arrival." Fiona stared down at the man kneeling at her damp, scuffed boots. "What are you talking about? How much is on that card?" David swallowed hard, sweat completely soaking the collar of his expensive shirt. "Mrs. Preston, your father did not leave you a bank account. He left you an empire. And whoever did this to you," he gestured to her soaked coat and shivering frame, "is going to face the wrath of the most powerful financial institution on Earth." The heavy titanium doors of the J.P. Morgan Chase underground vault hissed as they hermetically sealed. Fiona sat on a plush velvet sofa in a subterranean boardroom that looked like it belonged to a head of state. A crystal tumbler of Macallan 25-year-old Scotch sat untouched in front of her. David Kensington, still visibly shaken and pale, stood at the head of a massive mahogany table alongside two men in dark suits who had arrived within 10 minutes of the lockdown. They had flashed badges identifying themselves as agents of the Treasury Department's Office of Intelligence and Analysis. "Mrs. Preston," David began, his voice barely above a whisper, "what I am about to tell you is classified at a level that supersedes the clearance of the President of the United States. Your father, Thomas Gable, was not a mechanic, At least not the kind who fixes carburetors. Fiona wrapped her damp trench coat tighter around herself. He worked at a shop in Worcester. He came home smelling of oil. He died in a public hospital. Cover. One of the Treasury agents, a man named Agent Harrison, interjected. Thomas Gable was known in the intelligence community as the architect. During the Cold War, and later during the War on Terror, the United States government needed a way to move billions of dollars off the books to fund shadow operations, stabilize foreign economies, and sometimes dismantle hostile regimes without firing a single shot. Your father was a financial genius. He built the plumbing for the world's most secretive black budget funds. Fiona's mind spun. Then why did we live in a trailer? Why did he let me pay for his cremation with a Discover card? Because he was hunted, Agent Harrison said grimly. There are cartels, foreign dictators, and rogue states that would have tortured you to death to get the codes in his head. His poverty was his armor. He lived a life of absolute asceticism to keep you safe. But when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he began liquidating the shell companies. He consolidated his lifetime commission, a percentage of every shadow dollar he ever moved, into a single, impenetrable sovereign trust. David Kensington pointed a trembling laser pointer at a massive screen on the wall. The card he gave you is a Tier 0 access key. It bypasses all global banking regulations. It holds $12.45 billion in liquid capital. Furthermore, the protocol attached to it grants you total diplomatic immunity regarding financial acquisitions. Fiona stared at the screen, barely breathing, as the enormous number glowed before her. The figure was so large that her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Just 12 hours earlier, she had been standing in a motel lobby, quietly calculating whether she could afford a $49 room for the night. Now, according to the balance on the screen, she was suddenly the wealthiest woman on the eastern seaboard. Her hands trembled as she looked up at David, still unable to believe that the life she had known was gone. "What do you want to do, Mrs. Preston?" David asked softly, his expression calm and professional. "We can arrange a private jet to Zurich, secure a compound in Aspen, or relocate you anywhere in the world. Whatever you need, whatever you desire, we can make the arrangements immediately." Fiona looked back at the impossible number, overwhelmed by the choices now placed before her. Fiona closed her eyes. The freezing rain on Beacon Hill, the smug look on Jessica's face wearing her custom silk robe, the cold, dead eyes of the man she had loved telling her to figure it out after stealing a decade of her life and her hard-earned savings. When Fiona opened her eyes, the terrified, heartbroken woman from the parking lot was gone. The daughter of the architect had woken up. "I don't want a jet," Fiona said, her voice turning to steel. "I want a lawyer. The most vicious, morally flexible corporate assassin in Boston." "That would be Jonathan Sterling," David said before quickly correcting himself. "Excuse me, I mean Jonathan Cross. He is a predator in a bespoke suit." "Get him here," Fiona commanded, "and send someone to the Four Seasons. I want the presidential suite booked indefinitely. Then call the concierge at Chanel on Newbury Street. Tell them to close the store to the public. I need a new coat." By 3 p.m., Fiona was sitting in the penthouse of the Four Seasons, overlooking the Boston Public Garden. She was dressed in a tailored ivory-white Chanel suit that fit her like armor. Her hair had been professionally styled, and a makeup artist had erased the physical evidence of her tears. Sitting across from her was Jonathan Cross. He was a man who looked like a shark that had learned to walk on land. He reviewed the documents Fiona's new banking team had provided him. "Your husband, Richard Preston, is a fool," Jonathan said, a sinister grin spreading across his face. He thinks he outsmarted you by moving his real estate portfolio into an offshore LLC in the Cayman Islands to hide it during the divorce. Can we touch it? Fiona asked, sipping her espresso. Mrs. Preston, with the Tier 0 access you possess, we don't just touch it. We own the ocean it floats in, Jonathan chuckled dryly. Richard heavily leveraged his flagship property, the new commercial high-rise in the Seaport District, to finance his lifestyle with this new girl, Jessica. He took out a $150 million mezzanine loan from a Swiss private equity firm. And Jonathan tapped the black metal card sitting on the glass table. That Swiss private equity firm is a subsidiary of your father's shadow fund. Richard doesn't just owe a bank. He owes you. Because of the covenant clauses in his loan, the lender can call in the full balance at any time if the borrower faces a material change in marital assets. He hid the assets illegally, which constitutes fraud. We can call the loan immediately. Fiona smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. Call it. He won't be able to pay, Jonathan warned, clearly enjoying this. He will default instantly. We can legally seize the LLC, all of his personal properties, his cars, his bank accounts, and even his mother's pension fund if it's tied to his corporate umbrella. I want it all, Fiona said softly. I want him standing in the rain, just like he left me. 3 days later, the ballroom of the Boston Harbor Hotel was bathed in the warm, golden glow of crystal chandeliers. It was the launch party for Preston Holdings' newest seaport development. The room was packed with politicians, socialites, and Boston's elite. Richard Preston stood near the ice sculpture, wearing a custom Brioni tuxedo, holding a glass of Dom Perignon. Next to him was Jessica, draped in a stunning crimson Oscar de la Renta gown, paid for by the money Richard had siphoned from Fiona's business account. They were holding court, laughing and accepting congratulations from local real estate tycoons. It was a tough transition, frankly, Richard was telling a state senator, putting on a face of mock sorrow. Fiona just couldn't handle the pressure of this level of business. She became unstable. I had to let her go, for her own good. Jessica pouted sympathetically, clinging to his arm. She was holding him back. Richard needs a true partner. Suddenly, the string quartet in the corner stopped playing mid-note. The heavy mahogany doors to the ballroom swung open with a resounding crack that silenced the entire room. Fiona walked in. She was breathtaking. The Ivy Chanel suit was replaced by a sleek black Tom Ford evening gown that radiated quiet, lethal power. Around her neck sat a staggering 40-carat diamond necklace, a vintage piece from the Harry Winston archive that David Kensington had secured for her. She was flanked by Jonathan Cross and 2 towering armed treasury agents in black suits. Whispers erupted across the ballroom like wildfire. The crowd naturally parted, intimidated by the sheer gravity of her presence, leaving a clear path to Richard. Richard's face flushed with anger. He handed his champagne to a waiter and marched toward her, lowering his voice to a vicious hiss. What the hell are you doing here, Fiona? Are you insane? Security is going to drag you out of here in handcuffs. How did you even afford that dress? Jessica stepped up behind him, smirking. You're embarrassing yourself, Fiona. Go back to whatever motel you're crying in. Fiona didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at Richard the way one might look at an insect on the sidewalk. Richard, Fiona said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the quiet room. I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here to serve you. Jonathan Cross stepped forward with a sadistic smile, opening a black leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, sealed with the crest of the Swiss Global Intelligence Directive, and shoved them directly into Richard's chest. Richard instinctively grabbed them before they hit the floor. "What is this?" Richard snapped, looking down at the papers. "That," Jonathan announced loudly, ensuring the politicians and investors in the room heard every word, "is a formal notice of immediate foreclosure and asset seizure. As of 4 p.m. today, Preston Holdings defaulted on its $150 million mezzanine loan." Richard laughed nervously, looking around the room. "That's impossible. My loan is with a private Swiss firm. We are in perfect standing." "You were in perfect standing," Fiona corrected, taking a step closer, "until the owner of that Swiss firm decided to call the debt due to your fraudulent transfer of marital assets to the Cayman Islands. A federal crime, by the way." Richard's confident facade began to crack. "The owner? You don't even know the owner. Who authorized this?" Fiona reached into her custom clutch and pulled out the heavy, matte black metal card. She held it up under the chandelier light. The gold chip gleamed. "I did," Fiona whispered. The color instantly drained from Richard's face as his eyes darted over the foreclosure documents. He saw the signatures. He saw the transfer of deeds. "No," Richard gasped, his knees visibly buckling. "No, this is a forgery. You're broke. You have nothing. I took everything." "You took the crumbs, Richard," Fiona said, her voice dropping to an icy chill. "My father was Thomas Gable, and he left me the bakery." Jonathan Cross adjusted his tie. "Under the terms of the default, my client now wholly owns Preston Holdings, the seaport property, the Beacon Hill townhome, the Cayman offshore accounts, and the Mercedes AMG currently parked at the valet. Oh, and Richard, we also froze your personal checking accounts an hour ago. You are currently overdrawn by $42. The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of gasps. Investors immediately started backing away from Richard as if he had a highly contagious disease. Jessica, finally grasping the reality of the situation, let go of Richard's arm like it was on fire. "Richard, what is she talking about? Is this true? Are we broke?" "Jess, baby, I can fix this," Richard stammered, reaching out for her. "I just need to call my lawyers." "Your lawyers resigned at 5 p.m. when their retainers bounced," Jonathan Cross noted cheerfully. Jessica looked at Richard, her face twisting in disgust. She didn't say a word. She simply turned on her heel and practically sprinted toward the exit, abandoning him in front of the entire Boston elite. Richard was hyperventilating, sweat pouring down his forehead. He looked at Fiona, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic terror. "Fiona, please. We were married for 10 years. You can't leave me with nothing. I'll be on the street." Fiona leaned in close, so only he could hear her final words. "Don't make this ugly, Richard. You're a smart boy. You'll figure it out." She turned around and walked out of the ballroom, the heavy doors shutting behind her, leaving her ex-husband standing in the ruins of the empire she had just legally burned to the ground. When she stepped out into the crisp Boston night, the rain had finally stopped. The stars were shining clearly above the harbor. She climbed into the back of her waiting Maybach, tapped the black metal card against her palm, and smiled. The storm was over. If you loved seeing Fiona get the ultimate revenge, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this incredible story with your friends who love a massive plot twist. And make sure you subscribe to our channel for more crazy, real-life drama stories every single week. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you found out your father left you a $12 billion shadow fund? See you in the next video.